The crystal chandeliers of Manhattan's most exclusive club cast diamonds of light across his face as Thales Westbrook signed away $1 million on a single promise. Make her fall in love in 30 days without her knowing who he really was. Sebastian Blackwell's cruel smile cut through the cigar smoke as he pointed to the security monitor, to the woman in the simple uniform pushing a cleaning cart through the marble lobby 60 floors below. Her, Sebastian said. The one who wouldn't look twice at any of us. Thales watched the screen, watched her move with quiet dignity through a world that refused to see her, and felt something dangerous stir in his chest. He thought it would be easy. He thought it was just a game. He had no idea that Kathy Monroe would become the one thing his billions couldn't buy, the woman who would teach him the difference between winning and deserving to win. Some bets cost more than money. They cost everything you thought you knew about love. The Metropolitan Club existed in that rarefied altitude where Manhattan's true power brokers gathered. Not the celebrities or the social climbers, but the men who moved markets with a phone call and reshaped skylines with their signatures. On the 78th floor of the Apex Tower, behind doors that required both a key card and a retinal scan, the club's private salon glowed with old money and new ambition. Thales Westbrook stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, one hand in the pocket of his custom Tom Ford suit, the other holding a glass of Macallan 50-year-old single malt. Below him, Manhattan stretched out like a kingdom he'd conquered before turning 35. The city's lights reflected in his emerald eyes, eyes that had stared down boardrooms full of men twice his age and made them blink first. "You're quiet tonight, Westbrook." Sebastian Blackwell's voice cut through the low murmur of conversation and the subtle notes of a jazz quartet playing in the corner. Bored with just being obscenely rich and devastatingly successful? Thales turned slowly, his expression giving away nothing. Sebastian lounged in a leather chair that probably cost more than most people's cars, his aristocratic features arranged in that perpetual smirk that made Thales want to rearrange them. They'd been rivals since Harvard, not friends, never friends, but locked in the kind of competitive dance that only men with too much money and not enough real problems could sustain. "Just wondering why you insisted on meeting here instead of somewhere with better scotch," Thales replied, his voice smooth as expensive silk. Sebastian laughed, that practiced hollow sound that echoed in rooms like this. "Because I have a proposition that requires privacy and witnesses." He gestured to the handful of other members scattered throughout the salon, men who pretended not to listen while catching every word. "A wager, if you will." "I'm listening." Thales moved away from the window, his tall frame casting shadows across the Persian rug that had once belonged to a dissolute duke. "You've built an empire on reading people, haven't you? Anticipating what they want, what they fear, how they'll move." Sebastian set down his drink with deliberate precision. "You pride yourself on understanding human nature, on being able to charm anyone, seduce any situation to your advantage. Is there a point approaching, or are you just reciting my biography? The point, my dear rival, is that I don't believe you're as infallible as you think." Sebastian's smile sharpened. "I believe your success has made you lazy, soft. You've forgotten what it's like to actually work for something, to face a real challenge." The insult hung in the air between them. Around the salon, conversations quieted. Even the jazz quartet seemed to play softer, as if the room itself leaned in to listen. Thales' expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his emerald eyes. "What did you have in mind?" "A bet." Sebastian stood, moving to stand before the windows where Thales had been. $1 million. The challenge is simple. I choose a woman. Any woman I want. You have 30 days to make her fall in love with you. Genuinely, completely, no going back in love with you. That's it. Thales raised an eyebrow. That's your impossible challenge. There's a condition." Sebastian turned, and his smile was razor-sharp. "You can't tell her who you are. No revealing you're Thales Westbrook, CEO of Westbrook Enterprises, billionaire master of the universe. You'll be nobody. Just another face in the crowd. No wealth, no power, no private jets or penthouse apartments. Just you, whoever that is, underneath all the money." The salon had gone completely silent now. This was the kind of bet that would be whispered about in clubs like this for years, the kind of story that became legend. Thales studied Sebastian's face, searching for the angle, the trap. There was always a trap with Sebastian. "And if I refuse, then everyone here will know that Thales Westbrook, the man who claims he can negotiate anything, who prides himself on understanding people, was afraid of a simple challenge." Sebastian's voice carried to every corner of the room. "That underneath all that confidence is just a man who knows his success is built on his last name and his bank account, not his actual merit." The manipulation was obvious, clumsy even. But it was also effective, because Sebastian understood the one thing that drove men like Thales: ego. "I accept," Thales said quietly. Sebastian's smile widened. "Excellent. Then let me introduce you to your impossible challenge." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen several times, then turned it to show a video feed, security footage from somewhere in the building. The image showed the marble lobby of the Apex Tower, gleaming and empty in the late-night hours. And there, moving through the frame with quiet efficiency, was a woman pushing a cleaning cart. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the plain uniform she wore or the simple way her dark hair was pulled back. Even through the grainy security footage, there was something in the way she moved. A dignity, a presence that couldn't be diminished by the industrial cleaning supplies or the late hour or the job that society deemed invisible. "Her name is Kathy Monroe," Sebastian said, and his voice carried a note of cruel amusement. 29 years old. She works the night shift cleaning offices in this building, including your office, actually, though I doubt you've ever noticed her. She's worked here for 3 years, never been late, never complained, never tried to leverage her access to powerful men into anything more than her hourly wage. Thales couldn't look away from the screen. The woman, Kathy, had stopped her cart to pick up something someone had dropped, a piece of paper that had missed the trash can. She disposed of it properly, then continued on, her movements graceful despite the menial task. "She's perfect for this," Sebastian continued, "because Kathy Monroe is the one kind of woman you've never had to deal with, the kind who won't be impressed by you. She sees men like us every day, Thales. She cleans up after our messes, empties our trash, polishes the marble we walk across without looking down. And you know what? She couldn't care less. To her, we're all just the people who make messes she has to clean." "What makes you think she won't fall for charm and attention?" Thales asked, still watching the screen as Kathy moved out of frame. "Because 3 months ago, Marcus Chen from Chen Industries asked her out. He was impressed by her, wanted to take her to dinner. Offered to send a car, the whole thing. You know what she said?" Sebastian's smile was triumphant. "She said, 'I don't date men who notice me because they're bored with women who already want them.' Then she went back to work." Around the salon, there were low whistles of appreciation. Even Thales felt something shift in his chest. Respect, maybe, or intrigue, or something more dangerous. "She's proud," Sebastian said. "Dignified. Smart enough to see through games and grounded enough not to be seduced by wealth. She's worked too hard for too long to be anyone's amusing distraction, which makes her the perfect challenge for you. 30 days, Westbrook. Make Kathy Monroe fall in love with you without her knowing you're anyone but another working person struggling to get by. No wealth, no status, no advantage, except whatever actual worth you have as a human being." He paused, letting the challenge sink in. "Assuming you have any." Thalys handed his glass to a passing waiter, his decision already made. Not because of Sebastian's manipulation, not because of the money or the wounded pride, but because in those few seconds of security footage, he'd seen something that his world of board meetings and strategic acquisitions and carefully managed relationships had made him forget existed. Authenticity. $1 million, Thalys said. And when I win, you donate it to whatever charity she chooses. Confident, Sebastian extended his hand. I like it. Makes the fall so much more satisfying. They shook hands, and the trap was set. What neither of them knew, what neither of them could have known, was that some challenges change the challenger more than the challenged. Some bets cost more than money. And some women are impossible, not because they're unattainable, but because once you truly see them, you can never go back to the shallow waters you used to swim in. Thalys Westbrook had just accepted the greatest gamble of his life. He thought he was hunting. He had no idea he was about to become prey. The first thing Thalys Westbrook did, after accepting Sebastian's bet, was something he hadn't done in over a decade. He went shopping at a regular store. Not the private showrooms where designers brought collections to him, not the bespoke tailors who measured him in his own office, but an actual department store in Midtown where fluorescent lights hummed overhead and price tags were displayed instead of discreetly omitted. He bought jeans, regular jeans that cost $49.95 instead of the $4,000 Japanese denim he usually wore. He bought plain button-down shirts in colors that could be called blue instead of Mediterranean midnight. He bought a backpack that held a laptop, the kind that consultants and freelancers carried on the subway because they couldn't afford car services. Standing in his penthouse apartment, the one that occupied the entire 82nd floor of the Millennium Tower, the one with 360-degree views of Manhattan and a private elevator that required both a key and a code. Thalys looked at himself in the mirror wearing his new costume. Thomas Wells, he'd decided to call himself. Thomas, because it was common enough to be forgettable. Wells, because it suggested depth without pretension. The man looking back at him was unrecognizable. Without the armor of custom suits and Italian leather shoes, without the confidence that came from knowing his watch cost more than most people's cars, he looked ordinary, approachable, human. It was terrifying. You're really doing this? His assistant, Margaret, the only person who knew about the bet besides the witnesses at the club, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. She'd worked for him for 12 years, and in all that time, she'd never looked at him with quite this expression, something between concern and disappointment. It's just 30 days, Thalys said, adjusting the backpack on his shoulders. It felt strange, carrying his own things instead of having them carried for him. It's cruel, Margaret said quietly. Whatever Sebastian thinks he's proving, using an innocent woman as a pawn in your ego games is cruel. I'm not going to hurt her. You already are just by starting this. Margaret moved into the room, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Thalys, I've watched you build an empire. I've seen you negotiate deals that changed industries. But this isn't business. This is someone's heart you're gambling with. I'll stop it before it goes too far, he said. But even as the words left his mouth, they felt hollow. Margaret studied him for a long moment. The most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. She handed him a folder. I pulled everything publicly available on Kathy Monroe. No private information, nothing invasive, just what anyone could find with basic research. Read it. Understand who you're about to deceive. Maybe it'll change your mind. Then she left, and Thalys was alone with the folder and his reflection and the growing sense that he'd just stepped off a cliff without checking how far the fall would be. He opened the folder. Kathy Monroe. Born in Brooklyn 29 years ago. Mother. Single parent, nurse, died 5 years ago from breast cancer. Father, unknown. Younger sister, Jasmine Monroe, currently in her 3rd year at NYU, studying biomedical engineering, full scholarship student. Kathy's employment, night shift custodial services at Apex Tower, 3 nights per week. Weekend shift at Harbor Community Center teaching literacy classes. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, food service at Morningside Cafe. Currently enrolled online master's program in public policy and administration through Columbia University. Expected graduation in 8 months. Student debt, $73,000. Savings, minimal. Credit score, excellent, despite financial constraints. Criminal record, none. Traffic violations, none. Social media presence, virtually non-existent beyond a LinkedIn profile listing her education and volunteer work. But it was the final note that stopped him. 3 months ago, declined a dinner invitation from Marcus Chen Industries, with the response, "I don't date men who notice me because they're bored with women who already want them." Has reportedly declined similar advances from other executives in the building with polite but firm refusals. Known among cleaning staff for her work ethic, kindness to co-workers, and consistent refusal to gossip or engage in building politics. Thalys closed the folder and stood at his window, looking down at the city that had always seemed so conquerable. Kathy Monroe wasn't struggling because she lacked intelligence or drive. She was struggling because she'd been born on the wrong side of the chasm that separated people like him from people like her. The invisible divide that had nothing to do with merit and everything to do with luck, circumstance, and the brutal mathematics of inequality. She was working 3 jobs and pursuing a master's degree while supporting her sister through college. She was doing in 72 hours what most people couldn't accomplish in 168, and he was about to lie to her for a bet. The thought sat in his chest like ice water, but he'd already accepted the challenge, already shaken Sebastian's hand in front of witnesses, already set the trap in motion. Just 30 days, he told himself. Then I'll end it, tell her the truth, make it right somehow. The lies we tell ourselves are always the most convincing. Kathy Monroe pushed her cleaning cart through the marble lobby of Apex Tower at 11:47 on a Wednesday night, her mind only halfway on the task at hand. The other half was wrestling with the email she'd received that afternoon, the one that had been sitting in her inbox for 3 hours before she'd finally opened it during her break at the cafe. Subject, scholarship opportunity. Immediate response required. The Pemberton Foundation, in partnership with the London School of Economics, was offering a full scholarship for their accelerated public policy program. 1 year in London, all expenses paid. Guaranteed placement in a policy think tank upon completion. The kind of opportunity that could change everything. The kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime, if you were lucky enough for it to come at all. Application deadline, 2 weeks from today. Acceptance deadline if offered 30 days. She should have been celebrating, should have been calling Jasmine, should have been allowing herself to imagine a life where she wasn't exhausted all the time, where she could focus on her studies without wondering how she'd make rent. Instead, she felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. If she left for London, Jasmine would have to manage alone for a year. Yes, her sister had scholarships, but not everything was covered. And Jasmine was only 21, brilliant but still finding her way, still needing guidance and support, and someone to call when the world felt overwhelming. Could she leave her? Should she? The questions chased each other in circles as Kathy emptied trash cans and wiped down surfaces, as she moved through the building that housed more wealth on a single floor than existed in her entire neighborhood. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the man until she nearly collided with him. "Oh!" They both stopped short, her cleaning cart between them like an accidental barrier. He was tall, with dark hair slightly too long to be corporate perfect, and eyes that caught the lobby's light in a way that made her think of deep water. He wore jeans and a plain shirt and carried a backpack over one shoulder. Not unusual. Plenty of people worked late in this building, plenty of consultants and contractors who weren't part of the executive class. But there was something about the way he looked at her. Not through her, the way most people in this building did. Not at her uniform or her cart or her position, but at her. Actually, at her. "Sorry," he said, and his voice was smooth but not practiced, educated but not condescending. "I wasn't watching where I was going." "Neither was I," Kathy admitted, then felt foolish. She was at work. She should be professional, polite, invisible. "Excuse me." She started to move past him, to continue down the hallway, to return to the comfortable anonymity of her work. "Do you know if there's coffee anywhere?" he asked. "I'm working late and I'm running on fumes." Kathy paused, turned back. "The executive lounge on 72 has coffee 24/7, but—" She hesitated. "You need a key card." "Which I don't have." He smiled, and it was surprisingly genuine. "Figures. I'm Thomas, by the way, freelance consultant, currently doing some project work for—" He waved vaguely. "Well, some company that shall remain nameless because I signed about 17 NDAs. Despite herself, Kathy smiled. "Kathy, I work here." "I can see that." He glanced at her card, but not with judgment, just acknowledgement. "Late shift? 3 nights a week. Pays better than days, and I can work around my other schedule." "Other schedule?" He seemed genuinely interested, which was unusual enough to make her cautious. "School, and another job." She didn't know why she was telling him this. She didn't know why she was still standing here talking instead of moving on with her work. Wow, that's impressive. And the thing was, he sounded like he meant it. "What are you studying?" "Public policy, through Columbia's online program." She could hear the pride in her own voice and didn't try to hide it. "Columbia, that's not easy to get into." "No, it's not." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. "Well, Kathy from Columbia, who works 3 jobs, Thomas said. "Since I can't access the executive coffee, do you know where the closest all-night deli is? I'll brave the cold if it means caffeine." She shouldn't. She should say goodbye, should get back to work, should maintain the professional distance that kept her safe in this building. But there was something about the way he looked at her, something about the genuine interest in his eyes, the lack of pity or condescension, or the kind of predatory attention she'd learned to spot and avoid. 2 blocks north, 1 block west, she said. "Morelli's. Open 24 hours. Get the Colombian roast, not the house blend. Trust me on that." Colombian roast at Morelli's," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "Thanks, I appreciate the insider knowledge." "It's just coffee." "It's never just coffee at midnight when you're trying to meet a deadline." He adjusted his backpack. "I should let you get back to work, but thanks for the recommendation and for not making me feel like an idiot for not knowing where the coffee was." Then he was walking away toward the elevators, and Kathy was standing in the empty lobby with her cleaning cart and the strange feeling that something had just shifted in the universe. She shook it off. It was nothing. Just a polite conversation with a stranger working late. It happened, except it didn't, not usually, not with men in this building. Kathy returned to her work, emptying trash cans and polishing surfaces and trying not to think about green eyes and genuine smiles and the way someone had looked at her like she was a person instead of furniture. What she didn't see was Thomas, Thalys, standing in the elevator with his hand against the wall, his heart beating harder than it should have been from a simple conversation. He'd expected someone defeated by circumstance. Someone ground down by the weight of too many jobs and too few opportunities. Instead, he'd found someone luminous with dignity, someone who carried herself like royalty despite the plain uniform, someone whose smile had knocked the air from his lungs and whose voice had intelligence and warmth and a kind of groundedness he'd never encountered in his world of calculated charm and strategic relationships. Just 30 days, he'd told himself, but he was already in trouble. Because Kathy Monroe wasn't going to be a challenge to overcome, or a puzzle to solve, or a bet to be won. She was going to be the reckoning he didn't know he needed. 20 days. That's how long it took for Thalys Westbrook's carefully constructed lie to become the most honest relationship of his life. 20 days of accidental encounters in the Apex Tower lobby. 20 days of conversations that started at midnight and stretched until 2 in the morning, sitting on the marble steps by the fountain, while Kathy took her break and Thomas pretended he was working on projects that didn't exist. 20 days of discovering that Kathy Monroe was more than beautiful, more than dignified, more than intelligent. She was extraordinary in ways that had nothing to do with the metrics his world used to measure worth. "Tell me something true," she'd said on their 5th night, sitting on those marble steps with her coffee in her hands and her uniform somehow making her look more regal than all the designer gowns he'd seen in his lifetime. "What do you mean?" he'd asked. "Something real, not small talk, not surface, something that matters to you." Her dark eyes had studied him in the low light of the lobby. "You're good at conversation, Thomas. You're charming and smart and you know how to make people comfortable, but I want to know something true." And he'd found himself telling her about his mother, the real story, not the sanitized version he told at galas. How she died when he was 16, how his father had immediately married someone younger and pushed Thalys into the family business like he was just another asset to be managed. How he'd built his empire partly to prove himself and partly to create something his father couldn't control or claim or diminish. "You're lonely," Kathy had said quietly, and it wasn't a question. "I'm successful," he'd corrected. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." She'd looked at him with such clear seeing that he'd felt stripped bare. Success without connection is just expensive isolation. No one had ever said anything like that to him. No one in his world would dare. And that's when he'd realized he was in serious trouble. By day 10, their midnight conversations had expanded beyond the lobby. "I need a break from this building," Kathy had said, stretching her arms above her head after finishing the 70th floor. "I've been staring at the same marble and glass for 3 years. Sometimes I forget what the outside world looks like at night." "Come with me," Thalys had said before he could think better of it. "I know a place." He'd taken her to the roof garden of a building 4 blocks away, technically closed after hours, but he knew the security code from a project his company had done there years ago. He couldn't tell her that, of course, so he'd implied he'd discovered it through some vague consultant network. They'd sat on a bench, surrounded by sleeping flowers, and looked at Manhattan's skyline from a different angle than either of them was used to. "I got an email," Kathy had said into the comfortable silence. 3 weeks ago, the Pemberton Foundation, partnering with the London School of Economics. Full scholarship for their accelerated public policy program. 1 year in London, everything paid for. Guaranteed job placement after. Thalys had felt his chest tighten. Kathy, that's incredible. That's life-changing." "I know." But her voice had been heavy, not celebratory. "So why don't you sound happy?" She'd been quiet for a long moment, her hands clasped in her lap. "Because accepting it means leaving my sister here alone for a year. Means putting my life on pause, or maybe completely changing its direction. Means," she trailed off. "Means what?" "Means leaving behind the things I'm starting to care about here." She'd looked at him then, and the vulnerability in her eyes had stolen his breath. the people I'm starting to care about. He should have encouraged her to go, should have pushed her toward the opportunity that could change her trajectory, that could give her everything she'd worked so hard for. Instead, he'd reached for her hand. How long do you have to decide? They want an answer in 30 days, if I'm offered it. I find out in 2 weeks, if I got the spot. 30 days. The number had hung between them like an omen. That's enough time, he'd said, squeezing her hand gently. Enough time to figure out what you really want, what your heart's telling you, not just what your head thinks is logical. What if my heart's telling me something impossible, she'd whispered. Like what? Like maybe some connections are worth more than opportunities. Like maybe I'm tired of always being practical and strategic and responsible. Like maybe... She'd turned to face him fully. Like maybe I'm falling for someone I barely know, but who makes me feel more seen than people I've known for years. The world had narrowed to her face, her eyes, the space between them that suddenly felt both infinite and non-existent. Kathy, I know it's crazy, she'd interrupted. I know we've only known each other for 10 days. I know you're probably just being friendly and I'm reading too much into late-night conversations and... He'd kissed her. Right there on the roof garden with Manhattan sprawling below them and stars struggling to shine through the light pollution, he'd cupped her face in his hands and kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. And she'd kissed him back with a hunger that matched his own, with a passion that spoke of loneliness recognized and walls finally coming down, and the terrifying beauty of letting someone see you completely. When they'd finally broken apart, both breathing hard, Kathy had pressed her forehead to his. This is real, she'd said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement, a claim, a line drawn in the sand. Whatever this is between us, Thomas, it's real. Tell me you feel it too. I feel it, he'd said, and it was the truest thing he'd said since this whole game began. God, Kathy, I feel it. What he hadn't said, I feel it so much it terrifies me. I feel it so much I'm forgetting why I started this. I feel it so much I don't know how to end it without destroying us both. By day 15, Sales had stopped going back to his penthouse most nights. Instead, he'd rented a modest apartment in Brooklyn, the kind of place Thomas Wells might actually afford. 1 bedroom, dated fixtures, a window that looked out onto a fire escape instead of the Manhattan skyline. He'd furnished it with second-hand pieces and learned to take the subway. He'd eaten at diners instead of Michelin-starred restaurants. He'd started to understand what it meant to actually think about prices, to budget, to make choices based on what he could afford instead of what he wanted. It was humbling. It was also oddly liberating. You're different lately, Margaret had said during one of their carefully orchestrated meetings in a coffee shop, far from anyone who might recognize him. Softer, more present. I'm just playing a role, he'd insisted. Are you? She'd studied him over her coffee cup. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like you're discovering who you actually are underneath all the armor you've worn for so long. Don't romanticize this, Margaret. It's still a lie. I know. That's what makes it tragic. She'd leaned forward. Thalys, you need to end this. Soon. Before someone gets hurt in ways that can't be fixed. I will. After 30 days, 30 days might be 29 days too late. But he hadn't listened, because Kathy had started looking at him with something that looked dangerously like love. And for the first time in his life, Thalys Westbrook was choosing something that felt good over something that was right. On day 18, Kathy invited him to meet her sister. They'd gathered at a small Thai restaurant in Brooklyn, the kind of place where the menu was laminated and the decor was aggressively floral and the food was so good it didn't matter. Jasmine Monroe was tall and brilliant and protective in the way younger siblings are when they've watched their older sister sacrifice everything to give them opportunities. "So you're Thomas," Jasmine had said, studying him with eyes that were darker than Kathy's, but just as perceptive. "The mysterious consultant who keeps my sister smiling for the first time in years." "Jasmine," Kathy had warned, but there was affection in her voice. "I'm just saying." Jasmine had turned to Thales. "She works herself to death. 3 jobs, a master's program, and somehow still finds time to help me with my engineering homework when I panic at 2 in the morning. So, if you're just passing time or playing games, please leave now and save us all the trouble." "I'm not playing games," Thales had said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. "Good." Jasmine had smiled then, sharp and approving, because she deserves someone who sees how incredible she is. Someone who doesn't just want to save her or fix her or use her to feel better about themselves. Someone who actually matches her. "I know how incredible she is," Thales had said, looking at Kathy. "It's impossible to miss." Later, after dinner, after Jasmine had hugged them both goodbye and headed back to her dorm, Kathy had laced her fingers through his as they walked through Brooklyn. "She liked you," Kathy had said. "Jasmine doesn't like anyone easily. You made an impression. She's protective of you. That's good. You deserve people who protect you. I've spent my whole life protecting other people," Kathy had said quietly. "My mom, when she was sick. Jasmine, always. Myself, because I had to. It's strange letting someone in, trusting that they won't—" She'd trailed off. "Won't what?" "Won't leave. Won't disappoint. Won't turn out to be something other than what they seem." She'd stopped walking, turned to face him on the quiet street. "Thomas, I need to tell you something." His heart had started racing. "What?" "I got the notification this morning. The Pemberton Scholarship. I got it. Full ride to London, starting in 3 months. Her eyes had searched his face. "It's everything I've worked for, everything I dreamed about." "That's wonderful," he'd said, and the words had tasted like ash. "Kathy, that's incredible. You earned this." "I know, but I also know—" She'd taken a breath. "I'm thinking about turning it down." "What? No! Kathy, you can't." "I can, and I'm considering it." Her voice had been firm. "Because I've spent my whole life making the practical choice, the responsible choice, the choice that made sense on paper. And yes, London makes sense, but being here, building something real with you, that makes sense to my heart, and maybe it's time I listen to that instead." The street had seemed to tilt beneath his feet. She was considering giving up her dream. For him. For a man who didn't even exist. "Kathy, you need to think about this carefully." "I have been. For 3 weeks I've been thinking about nothing else." She'd cupped his face in her hands. "Thomas, I've never felt like this before. Never felt this seen, this understood, this cherished. You make me believe in things I thought were just fairy tales. And maybe that's worth more than a degree program halfway across the world." He should have told her the truth right then. Should have confessed everything, the bet, the deception, who he really was. Should have pushed her toward London and away from the disaster he'd created. Instead, he'd kissed her like he could pour all his guilt and longing and desperate affection into the press of his lips against hers. Kissed her like he was trying to memorize the moment before it shattered, because it was going to shatter. It had to. And when it did, the destruction would be absolute. On day 19, Sebastian Blackwell sent him a message. "Time's almost up, Westbrook. I need proof by day 30, real proof, witnesses. Otherwise, you forfeit, and everyone knows you couldn't even seduce a cleaning lady when you put your mind to it. Clock's ticking." Thales had stared at the message for a long time. Then he'd made a decision. He would call off the bet, forfeit, pay Sebastian the $1 million and take the humiliation. Then he'd tell Kathy the truth, not all at once, not cruelly, but gently. He'd explain that he'd started with deception, but found something real. He'd help her get to London, fund whatever she needed, support her dreams even if it meant losing her. It would hurt, it would cost him, But it was the right thing to do. He'd meet Sebastian tomorrow, end this before it went any further. That was his plan. But that night, day 20, everything changed. He'd met Kathy after her shift, just like always. They'd walked through Manhattan as rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, until they were both soaked and laughing and taking shelter under the awning of a closed bookstore. "I love the rain," Kathy had said, watching it sheet down around them. "Washes everything clean, makes the city feel new." "You're going to catch a cold," he'd said, but he was smiling. "So are you." She'd reached up, pushed wet hair back from his forehead. "Thomas?" "Yeah?" "I made my decision. About London." Her eyes had held his, clear and certain despite the rain. "I'm staying. I'm going to finish my degree here, at my own pace. And I'm going to build a life that includes you. Because what we have, what we're building, it's worth more than any program, any opportunity, any plan I had before I met you." The rain had pounded around them. The world had narrowed to her face, her words, the impossible choice she'd just made. "Kathy, I love you," she'd said simply. "I know it's fast, I know it seems crazy, but I love you, Thomas Wells. And I need you to know that before anything else happens, before life gets complicated or circumstances change. I need you to know that you changed everything for me." He'd opened his mouth to tell her the truth, to confess everything, to stop her from making this terrible mistake. But then she'd kissed him, and the rain had hidden the tears streaming down his face, and he'd kissed her back, like a drowning man, and a liar and a fool, who'd just realized he'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with the woman he'd set out to deceive. "I love you too," he'd whispered against her lips. And it was true, and it was a lie, and it was the most complicated thing he'd ever said. Because he did love her. Desperately. Completely. But she loved someone who didn't exist. And in 12 hours, Sebastian Blackwell was going to make sure she found out. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel glittered like a jewelry box come to life. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across 500 guests dressed in gowns that cost more than cars and tuxedos, tailored to perfection. The annual Westbrook Enterprises Charity Gala, the event of the season, where Manhattan's elite gathered to write enormous checks and congratulate themselves on their generosity. Dallas Westbrook stood near the bar in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, champagne in hand, playing the role he'd been born to play, powerful, charming, untouchable. He'd returned to being himself for the night, shed Thomas Wells like a costume that no longer fit. But his mind was 4 blocks away, in a 24-hour diner, where Kathy was working her shift at the cafe before heading to her cleaning job. She didn't know about this gala. Didn't know that the building she cleaned belonged to the company hosting this ostentatious display of wealth. Didn't know that the man she loved was standing here in a tuxedo that cost more than 3 months of her rent. He'd tried to end it that morning, had called Sebastian, ready to forfeit, ready to confess everything to Kathy himself and face the consequences. "Too late," Sebastian had said, his voice smooth as poison. "The wheels are already in motion, my friend. Tonight, at your gala, the truth comes out. I've made sure of it. You can either be there to witness your failure, or you can run like a coward. Either way, she finds out. Sebastian, don't do this. The bet's off. I forfeit. Take your $1 million and leave her alone." "Oh, Thales, it was never about the money." Sebastian's laugh had been cold. "It was about proving that underneath all your success, you're just as hollow as the rest of us. See you tonight." The line had gone dead. And now Thales stood in this ballroom, his stomach twisted in knots, watching the entrance like a condemned man watching the gallows being built. "You look terrible," Margaret said, appearing at his elbow. She wore an elegant black gown and an expression of deep concern. "Please tell me you didn't let this happen." I tried to stop it. Sebastian is a sociopath, and you handed him ammunition. Her voice was low, urgent. Thales, what are you going to do? I don't know. He said she'd find out tonight, but I don't know how. She's not even... He stopped, because at that moment the service entrance opened and a line of catering staff entered the ballroom to refresh the hors d'oeuvres stations. And there, in a plain black service uniform, with her hair pulled back and a tray in her hands, was Kathy Munro. The world tilted. Oh, God, Margaret breathed. He hired her. Sebastian hired her to work this event. Thales' champagne glass nearly slipped from his hand. Across the ballroom, Kathy moved between guests, professional and invisible, the way service staff always were at events like this. She hadn't seen him yet, hadn't looked up from her task. She had no idea she was serving canapes at her boyfriend's company gala. Had no idea the man she loved was standing 50 feet away wearing a tuxedo that cost $8,000. Had no idea that in minutes her entire world was about to detonate. I have to get her out of here, Thales said, already moving, but Sebastian was faster. The sound of a champagne glass being tapped with a knife cut through the conversational hum of the ballroom. 500 faces turned toward the small stage where Sebastian Blackwell stood at the microphone, his smile sharp as broken glass. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment. Sebastian's voice carried across the room with practiced ease. I know we're here to celebrate Westbrook Enterprises' charitable contributions, but I have a little story to share. An amusing anecdote, if you will, about our esteemed host. Thales was already pushing through the crowd, panic clawing at his chest. Sebastian, don't... You see, Sebastian continued, ignoring him. 3 weeks ago, Thales Westbrook and I made a bet, a wager really, about the nature of authenticity and attraction. The challenge was simple. Could the great Thales Westbrook make any woman fall in love with him in 30 days without revealing his wealth, his status, his privilege? Could he succeed on merit alone? The crowd murmured. This was the kind of scandal they lived for, the gossip that would fuel conversations for months. Kathy had frozen near the edge of the room, her tray forgotten. She was looking at the stage now, at Sebastian, confusion written across her beautiful face. I chose the target, Sebastian said, and his smile widened. A woman who worked in his building, a woman who'd turned down advances from wealthy men before, a woman named Kathy Munro. 500 heads turned. 500 sets of eyes found her standing there in her service uniform, and Kathy's face went absolutely still. Thales created an entirely false identity, Sebastian continued, enjoying every word. Called himself Thomas Wells, pretended to be a struggling consultant, wore cheap clothes and took the subway and played the part of an everyday man just trying to make ends meet. And you know what? It worked. Kathy Munro fell for it, fell for him. Fell so hard she was willing to turn down a scholarship to the London School of Economics just to stay here with a man who doesn't even exist. The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers. Thales had finally reached the edge of the stage, but security, Sebastian's security, blocked his path. And across the room, Kathy stood perfectly still, her dark eyes locked on Sebastian, then slowly, devastatingly, moving to find Thales in the crowd. When their gazes met, he saw the exact moment her heart broke. The best part, Sebastian said, pulling out his phone and projecting an image onto the large screen behind him, is the proof. This photo was taken 3 nights ago. Our noble CEO and his unwitting conquest, kissing in the rain like something out of a movie. Beautiful, really. If it wasn't all based on a lie. The image on the screen showed Thales and Kathy exactly as Sebastian described, soaked from the rain, wrapped in each other's arms, kissing with the kind of passion that looked genuine because it was. But context was everything. And the context was a room full of Manhattan's elite, laughing and whispering and judging, while the woman he loved stood there in a service uniform, her dignity being shredded in front of hundreds of strangers. "So let's give Thales Westbrook a round of applause," Sebastian said, starting to clap slowly. He won his bet. He proved that with enough deception, anyone can manipulate someone's heart. "Congratulations, Thales. You're exactly as hollow as I suspected." The room fell silent, and Kathy set down her tray with hands that barely shook. Then she walked toward the exit with her head held high, not running, not crying, just moving with that same dignity she'd carried every time Thales had seen her pushing a cleaning cart or serving coffee or existing in spaces that tried to make her invisible. Except now everyone was watching. Now everyone saw her. And the humiliation of that visibility, the cruelty of being exposed and mocked and turned into entertainment for people who had never struggled a day in their lives. It was written in the set of her shoulders and the careful control of her expression. Thales shoved past security, past the guests, ignoring Sebastian's triumphant smile and Margaret's stricken face and the whispers that followed him like a wave. He caught up with Kathy in the marble hallway outside the ballroom, away from the crowd, but not away from the horror of what had just happened. "Kathy!" She spun to face him, and her eyes were dry, but blazing. "Don't! Don't you dare! Please, let me explain." "Explain what?" Her voice was controlled, deadly quiet. "Explain that everything was a lie. That Thomas Wells doesn't exist, that you're actually Thales Westbrook, billionaire CEO, and I was what? A game, a challenge, an amusing way to prove you could manipulate someone." "It started as that," he admitted, the words like broken glass in his throat. "But it became real. Kathy, what I feel for you is real. You don't get to say that." She took a step closer, and he could see she was trembling now, not with weakness but with rage. "You don't get to claim any of this was real when the foundation was built entirely on lies. You watched me struggle, watched me work 3 jobs and stress about money and worry about my sister. You listened to me talk about my dreams, my fears, my life. And the whole time, you had the power to change everything about my circumstances with a single phone call. But you didn't, because I was more useful to you as a project, as proof of concept, as entertainment." "That's not true, isn't it?" Tears were sliding down her face now, but her voice never wavered. "You let me fall in love with a ghost. You let me make life-changing decisions based on a relationship that didn't exist. I turned down London, Thales. I sent the email this morning declining the scholarship because I thought I had something worth staying for. I thought I had you." The pain in her voice was a physical thing, sharp enough to draw blood. "I was going to tell you," he said desperately. "Today, I was going to confess everything and help you get to London and—" "And what? Expect me to forgive you, to understand?" She shook her head. "You didn't just break my heart, Thales. You made me doubt every instinct I have, every judgment I trusted. You didn't just lie about who you were. You stole my ability to trust myself. Do you understand that? Do you understand what you took from me?" He did. God, he did. "I love you," he said, because it was all he had left. "I know I have no right to say it. I know you have no reason to believe it, but I love you, Kathy. Somewhere in the middle of the lie, I fell completely in love with you." She looked at him for a long moment, and her expression was the most heartbreaking thing he'd ever seen. Pity mixed with grief, mixed with something that might have been love if it wasn't being strangled by betrayal. "The cruelest part," she said softly, "is that I believe you. I believe you fell in love with me, but you fell in love with the version of yourself you were pretending to be. Thomas Wells loved me. Thales Westbrook just wanted to win a bet, and I'll never know which one I actually fell for because one of them never existed." She stepped back, creating distance that felt like miles. I need you to understand something, she continued. I'm not broken because you're rich and I'm not. I'm not angry because you have privilege I don't. I'm destroyed because you saw me, really saw me in a way no one ever has. And you used that seeing as a weapon. You turned intimacy into strategy. You made me believe I was finally being chosen for myself, when really I was just being studied. Kathy, I hope it was worth it, she said. I hope winning your bet was worth destroying someone who would have loved you honestly if you'd given her the chance. I hope proving you could manipulate me was worth losing the one person who saw past your money to something real underneath. Then she turned and walked away, down the marble hallway, past the security guards and the service entrance, and out into the Manhattan night. And Thales Westbrook, the man who had everything, who had built an empire before turning 35, who had never met a challenge he couldn't overcome, stood alone in an empty hallway and felt something inside him shatter so completely he wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. He went back into the ballroom. The crowd had returned to their conversations and their drinks, the scandal already being digested and analyzed and filed away as entertainment. Sebastian stood near the bar, looking pleased with himself. Thales walked straight to him, grabbed him by the collar of his expensive tuxedo, and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack the decorative plaster. "You want to destroy me?" Thales's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more threat than any shout. "Congratulations! You succeeded. But if you ever speak about her again, if you ever use her name or tell this story or treat her humiliation as a joke, I will dedicate every resource I have to ruining you so completely that you'll beg me to stop." Sebastian's smile faltered. "This bet is over," Thales continued. "You win. Take your $1 million. Enjoy your victory. But leave Kathy Monroe alone, or I swear to God, Sebastian, I will make you wish you'd never heard my name." He released Sebastian and stepped back. Around them, the ballroom had gone silent again, watching. Thales looked at the faces of his peers, the wealthy, the powerful, the people he'd spent his life impressing and competing with and trying to best, and he felt nothing but contempt. "This gala is over," he announced to the room. "Your donations will be doubled by Westbrook Enterprises and given directly to organizations supporting working families and educational opportunities. The rest of your evening, you and your opinions, are your own. Get out." Then he walked out of his own event, leaving behind the whispers and the shock and the life he'd built that suddenly seemed worthless without the one person who'd made him feel human. Margaret found him 3 hours later, sitting on the steps of the Apex Tower lobby, where he'd first talked to Kathy. "I've been calling you for hours," she said, sitting beside him. "I know. The board is furious. The press is going to have a field day. Sebastian is already spinning the story to make you look, I don't care." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "You really love her." "I really do. And I really destroyed her." He looked at his assistant, his friend, the only person who'd warned him from the beginning. "You were right, about all of it. I wish I'd been wrong." They sat in silence in the empty lobby, and Thales thought about the last 20 days. About Kathy's laugh and her intelligence and her dignity, about the way she'd looked at him, at Thomas, like he was someone worth knowing, about the future they'd imagined together that was built entirely on sand. He'd won the bet. He'd lost everything that mattered, and somewhere in Brooklyn, Kathy Monroe was probably crying herself to sleep, her dreams shattered, her trust destroyed, her heart broken by a man who'd loved her too late and too poorly to make any difference. The marble steps were cold, the building was empty, and Thales Westbrook finally understood what it meant to be truly alone. 3 months passed, like a slow apocalypse. Thales Westbrook dismantled his friendship with Sebastian Blackwell with surgical precision. He withdrew from every joint venture, every shared investment, every board where they both sat. He made it clear to Manhattan's elite that Sebastian's name was no longer to be mentioned in his presence, and that anyone who continued associating with him would find their relationship with Westbrook Enterprises significantly cooled. But that was just cleanup, just closing doors that should have been closed years ago. The real work, the work that mattered, was harder and took longer and cost him more than money. He started with the Pemberton Foundation. A call to the director, made from his office overlooking the city that suddenly felt empty despite 8 million people. The scholarship that was offered to Cathy Monroe for the London School of Economics program. She declined it. I'd like to know if there's any way to reinstate the offer. I'm sorry, Mr. Westbrook, but that position has been filled. The program started 2 weeks ago. Then create a new position. I'll fund it entirely. Full scholarship, living expenses, stipend, everything she needs. And I want it offered with no connection to my name or my company. Make it seem like the foundation expanded their program. Mr. Westbrook, I appreciate the offer, but Ms. Monroe was quite clear in her declination. She stated she had personal reasons for staying in New York. I'm not sure she'd accept even if we offered again. Offer anyway. Let her make the choice. But make sure she knows it's genuine, not charity, not pity. She earned that spot. She should have it available if she wants it. The director had agreed. The offer was sent. Cathy didn't respond. Next came Westbrook Enterprises itself. Thales called an emergency board meeting 6 days after the gala, still wearing the emotional wreckage of that night like a second skin. We're implementing a new corporate initiative, he'd announced to the 12 board members who controlled his company's direction. The Dignity in Labor program. Every service worker in every Westbrook building, custodial staff, food service, security, maintenance, gets immediate wage increases to $25 per hour minimum. Full health benefits, retirement contributions, educational assistance for anyone pursuing degrees or certifications. That's going to cost millions annually, one board member had protested. I don't care. It's non-negotiable. Thales, we have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. Our fiduciary responsibility is to operate ethically and sustainably. Paying people fairly is both. This program launches immediately. Anyone who disagrees can tender their resignation. No one resigned. The program launched within 2 weeks, but Thales didn't tell Cathy, didn't send her articles about it or expect praise or recognition. He did it because she'd been right about him, about his world, about the way privilege insulated people from understanding the cost of inequality. He did it because he was trying to become someone who deserved a second chance, even if he never got one. He liquidated his penthouse, the entire 82nd floor of the Millennium Tower, the apartment with 360-degree views and marble imported from Italy and furniture that cost more than most people's houses. He sold it all and moved into the modest Brooklyn apartment he'd rented to play Thomas Wells. Except this time, it wasn't a costume. It was his actual life. He learned to grocery shop and cook his own meals and take the subway every day. He learned what it felt like to check prices and budget and make choices based on practicality instead of impulse. He learned to be Thomas Wells for real. Margaret visited him there on a Tuesday evening, bringing Thai food from the place where he'd met Jasmine. "The board thinks you're having a breakdown," she said, unpacking containers on his second-hand table. "Maybe I am. Or maybe you're having a breakthrough." She sat across from him. "You're different, Thales. Quieter, more present, less—" she searched for the word, "less defended. I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too arrogant to recognize it until it was too late. That tends to change a person. Have you tried to contact her?" "No." "Why not?" He was quiet for a long moment, pushing pad thai around his plate. "Because I don't get to decide when she's ready to hear from me. I don't get to push my timeline or my need for closure onto her healing process. I broke her trust. The least I can do is respect her space. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed his hand. That's growth. It doesn't feel like growth. It feels like penance. Sometimes they're the same thing. He started attending community meetings in Brooklyn, city planning sessions about affordable housing, school board meetings about educational funding, neighborhood councils discussing resources for working families. He sat in the back, listening, learning, understanding for the first time how the systems he'd navigated so easily from the top looked from the bottom, how complicated and frustrating and deliberately obtuse they were designed to be. He started writing checks, big ones, anonymous ones, to the community center where Kathy taught literacy classes, to scholarship funds for first-generation college students, to organizations fighting for worker rights and fair wages and accessible education. He couldn't fix his mistake with Kathy, but he could honor what she'd taught him by trying to fix the systems that had made her life unnecessarily difficult. It wasn't redemption. It was just trying to be less complicit. 9 weeks after the gala, he saw her for the first time, a city planning meeting about a new workforce development initiative. Thales had been attending these meetings for weeks, sitting quietly in the back, contributing when asked, but mostly just learning. And then Kathy walked in, except she didn't look like the woman he'd known. She wore a tailored blazer and carried a briefcase. Her hair was styled professionally. She moved with confidence that had always been there but was now amplified by context. She belonged in this room, and everyone could see it. "Good evening, everyone," the council chair said. "I'd like to introduce our newest presenter. Kathy Monroe is the recently appointed Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Metropolitan Workforce Alliance. She's here to discuss their proposal for expanded job training programs." Director of Strategic Initiatives. Thales' heart hammered against his ribs. She'd moved forward, built herself a new path, succeeded without him, without London, without any of the things she'd sacrificed. Kathy moved to the front of the room and began her presentation, and she was magnificent, articulate, passionate, brilliant. She spoke about equity and opportunity and dignity with the authority of someone who'd lived every word. Thales couldn't look away. And then, halfway through her presentation, her eyes swept the room and landed on him. She paused, just for a heartbeat, just long enough for him to see the flash of recognition, the tightening of her jaw, the wall that slammed down behind her eyes. Then she continued, professional and composed, as if he were just another face in the crowd. After the presentation, people swarmed her with questions and praise. Thales stayed in his seat, giving her space, respecting the boundary she'd silently drawn. He was about to leave when she appeared beside him. "I heard about the Dignity in Labor program," she said without preamble. $25 minimum wage, full benefits, educational assistance. That's good work. It should have existed years ago. Yes, it should have. She looked at him directly for the first time in 9 weeks. "Why are you here, Thales?" "Learning. Trying to be better. Trying to understand the world from a perspective other than the top." He met her gaze. "Trying to become someone who might have deserved you if I'd been this person from the beginning." Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. "I'm not doing this for you," he added quickly. "I'm not expecting forgiveness or a second chance. I'm doing it because you showed me who I was, and I didn't like what I saw. You deserve the credit for that." "I don't want credit." Her voice was steady but not cold. "I want you to mean it, not because you lost me, but because it's right." "I do mean it." He stood, creating space. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Director of Strategic Initiatives. That's incredible, Kathy. You're changing lives." "I'm trying." She adjusted her briefcase. The Metropolitan Workforce Alliance was actually partially funded by an anonymous donation 3 months ago. A very large anonymous donation that came through so many legal channels I couldn't trace the source. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? He said nothing. She almost smiled. Goodbye, Thales. Goodbye, Kathy. He watched her walk away, and it hurt less than the first time. Not because he cared less, but because she was walking towards something instead of away from devastation. She was whole. She was thriving. She was exactly who she'd always been, just finally in a position where the world could see it. And that mattered more than his broken heart. 2 more months passed. Thales continued his quiet work. The community meetings, the anonymous donations, the systematic reformation of how Westbrook Enterprises treated its workers. He sold another property, founded a scholarship fund for children of service workers, started mentoring young entrepreneurs from underserved communities. He did it all without publicity, without recognition, without any expectation of reward. He did it because Kathy had been right about everything, and the least he could do was prove her effect on him had been real. Margaret noticed the change became permanent somewhere around month 4. "You're not going back, are you?" she asked over coffee. "To who you were before?" "No, I don't want to." He looked at her. "For the first time in my life, I like who I'm becoming more than who I was. Even without her. Especially without her. She deserves someone who's good because it's who they are, not because they're trying to win her back. If I can become that person, then maybe I'll have honored what she gave me, even if I destroyed what we had." On a cold February evening, 5 months after the gala, Thales was leaving Westbrook Enterprises headquarters when he saw someone standing by the entrance. Kathy. She wore a long coat against the winter wind, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. When she saw him, she didn't smile, but she didn't leave either. "I've been watching you," she said as he approached. "Not stalking, but paying attention. The workforce initiative you funded at the last city council meeting. The apprenticeship program you launched last month. The fact that you show up to community meetings and actually listen instead of talking." "I'm learning," he said simply. "I know." She studied his face. "Jasmine told me you've been mentoring students at NYU, including her entire engineering study group. She said you spent 4 hours helping them understand venture capital funding models and never once mentioned your name or your company. They're brilliant kids. They deserved good information. She also said you asked about me. Not to get information, but to make sure I was okay. To make sure the new job was treating me well." He didn't deny it. Kathy took a breath, and he could see her gathering courage. "I came here to tell you something. I didn't forgive you." The words landed like stones. "But," she continued, "I forgive myself for falling for you, for trusting you, for making choices that felt right even though they were based on incomplete information. I spent months hating myself for being fooled. And then I realized I wasn't foolish. You were deceptive. There's a difference." "There is," he agreed quietly. "The man I fell in love with, Thomas Wells, he was real. He was just buried under your lies and your ego and your stupid bet. But he was real, Thales. I see that now. Because he's who you're trying to become. You're trying to grow into the person you pretended to be." His throat was tight. "I am." "Why?" Her eyes searched his. "Why are you doing all this? The real reason. Not the noble answer, the true one." He could have lied, could have given her the answer that made him look best. Instead, he told her the truth. "Because you made me feel real. For the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw past the money and the power and the success to something underneath. And even though I was lying about who I was, you made me want to actually be that person. You made me want to deserve the way you looked at me." He took a breath. "And then I destroyed that. And I can't undo it, Kathy. I can't go back and make better choices. All I can do is become someone who would make better choices now, someone who actually deserves to be seen the way you saw Thomas Wells." She was quiet for a long time, the winter wind pulling at her coat. "I didn't come here to get back together," she finally said. "I know. I came because I needed to see if the change was real, if you were really becoming that person, or if this was just another game, another strategy. And I think you're trying. I think you're actually becoming someone different, someone better." She paused. "But I'm different too now. I'm not the woman who fell for Thomas Wells. I'm not struggling to survive anymore. I'm thriving. I'm building a career that matters. I'm changing systems, just like I always wanted to. You are, and I'm so proud of you. So, if we're going to do this, if we're going to see if there's anything salvageable between us, it has to be different. It has to be honest. It has to be two equals choosing each other with full information, not one person holding power over the other." His heart was beating so hard, he thought she might hear it. "Are we going to do this?" She smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her in 5 months. "I don't know yet, but I'm willing to find out, slowly, carefully, with complete honesty and no expectations. I'll take that." "Good." She started to turn, then stopped. "Thales." "Yeah?" "The man I fell in love with on those marble steps at midnight. I can see him in you right now, not buried anymore, actually present." Her eyes held his. "Keep becoming him. Not for me, for you. Because that's who you actually are when you stop trying to prove things to people who don't matter." Then she walked away into the February night, and this time it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. 9 months later, the rooftop garden where they'd first kissed looked different in autumn sunlight. Kathy sat on the same bench, but she wore a blazer from her new wardrobe and carried a tablet showing her presentation for the city council's next meeting. Thales sat beside her in jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like Thomas Wells than he ever had while playing the role. "I got offered a position with the mayor's office," Kathy said, watching the leaves change color on the potted trees. "Senior Director of Workforce Development. It's everything I dreamed about when I was taking that online master's program and wondering if I'd ever get to use it." "That's incredible," Thales said, and meant it. "Are you going to take it?" "I think so. It means more visibility, more pressure, but also more impact." She looked at him. "What do you think?" "I think you should do whatever feeds your soul and challenges your mind. I think you're extraordinary at what you do, and any position you take will be lucky to have you." She smiled. "Still no advice? No trying to influence my decision?" "Still no. Your choices are yours, Kathy. They always should have been." They'd been doing this for 7 months now. Coffee dates that became dinner dates that became long conversations about real things, their work, their dreams, their fears, the ways they were both still learning to be better versions of themselves. It wasn't the passionate, all-consuming romance of their first 20 days. It was something slower, deeper, built on foundations of honesty instead of fiction. Sometimes Kathy still got angry. Sometimes the betrayal surfaced and she needed space. Sometimes Thales still struggled with the instinct to solve her problems, with money instead of presence. But they were learning, growing, building something real. "I love you," Thales said, because he told her that now. Often. Without expectation of reciprocation, just truth, offered freely. Kathy was quiet for a moment, then reached for his hand. "I love you too," she said. "The real you, not Thomas Wells, not the perfect fantasy. Thales Westbrook, flawed and trying and actually showing up. I love that version." He kissed her hand, overwhelmed by the gift of her trust, the miracle of her willingness to try again. "Thank you," he whispered, for giving me another chance, for teaching me what love actually means, for making me want to be worthy of you. You don't have to be worthy of me, she corrected gently. You just have to be honest with me. Keep doing that, and we'll figure out the rest. Below them, Manhattan pulsed with life. Somewhere in the city, people were struggling the way Kathy once struggled. Somewhere, someone was working 3 jobs and pursuing impossible dreams. Thales thought about the programs he'd founded, the policies he'd changed, the lives that had been impacted by the lesson Kathy had taught him, that dignity matters more than profit, that humanity matters more than success, that seeing people, really seeing them, is the most revolutionary act of all. He'd started this journey trying to win a bet. He'd ended it winning something infinitely more valuable, the right to love and be loved by a woman who saw straight through to his soul and challenged him to match her truth with his own. Some games are worth losing, some lessons cost everything, and some women change you so completely that you can never go back to who you were before, nor would you want to. Kathy leaned her head on his shoulder, and Thales breathed in the moment, knowing that this honesty, this hard-won connection, this love built from ashes, was worth more than every bet he'd ever won and every empire he'd ever built. "What are you thinking?" Kathy asked. He smiled. "That I'm grateful, that I'm lucky, that I have no idea what I did to deserve this second chance, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning it." "Good answer." She lifted her head to look at him. "But Thales?" "Yeah? You already earned it. Every day for the last 9 months, every choice you've made, every way you've shown up, that earned it. Now you just have to keep being that person, the one who learned that love isn't about games or power or winning. It's about showing up, telling the truth, and choosing each other even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. And somewhere in the city below them, life continued its chaotic dance. But up here, in this rooftop garden where everything had once fallen apart, 2 people who'd both been broken by lies were building something new from truth, and that was the greatest love story of all.